In a historic move, the UK, Australia and Canada have officially recognised the State of Palestine. The announcement comes ahead of a formal declaration at the UN General Assembly in New York on Monday. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said this decision is part of an effort to revive a two-state solution.
The hope of a two-state solution is fading. But we cannot let that light go out. That is why we are building consensus with leaders in the region and beyond around our framework for peace. This is a practical plan to bring people together behind a common vision and a series of steps, including the reform of the Palestinian Authority. That moment has now arrived. So today, to revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution, I state clearly, as Prime Minister of this great country, that the United Kingdom formally recognises the State of Palestine.
All right, joining us now is Layla Moran, a member of the UK Parliament who presented a bill for the recognition of the State of Palestine. She's joining us from Oxford in the United Kingdom. So first of all, let me start by asking you, does this address Britain's historical colonial responsibility for what happened in Palestine? And what we're talking about is, many decades ago, when it was the mandate power, essentially recognizing statehood for a mainly immigrant Jewish community in Palestine, while not recognizing the same rights for the natives of that land. Does this one step address all of that?
It certainly doesn't address all of it, Sammy, but it's a start. I mean, what my great-grandfather was one of those Palestinians. I'm the first British parliamentarian of Palestinian descent, hence why every year that I was able to put forward a bill to recognize the State of Palestine since I've been elected, I have done so, because it made no sense. In the 1917 Balfour Declaration, the political rights, as we know famously, of Palestinians wasn't protected, but it made no sense that while the UK government did recognise the State of Israel, it didn't recognise the State of Palestine. And I think it is important to keep drawing out. A lot of the rhetoric today is about how, this is linked to the genocide in Gaza. It shouldn't have taken us a genocide to get to this point. This was a decades-long injustice that has now been rectified. But I think people are right, if I may, to question, well, the what now? Because frankly, this is a small step. But I think the way we should see it is the beginning of a journey. And what frustrated many of us was that, well, if they couldn't even do this, then how on earth can they be expected to do more? And now they should do more. They've done this. They can't undo this. They'll have egg on their face if they stop at this. They now have put down a down payment on peace, and I think that's how this should be seen. But there is much, much more to do. So we shouldn't overplay it, but equally we shouldn't underplay it. This is a significant day and a great day
but
for
Layla, if
British
I could get
campaign.
specific here, I mean, you've spoken about how recognising a State of Palestine would safeguard Palestinian interests, would signal accountability of Israel. Does that look like that's happening now? I mean, as soon as these announcements were made by some of the Western powers, we had more reports of Palestinians being killed in what the UN calls a genocide.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think I did say it's accountability. I said it's a small step, but it's important. It's an important step. It's a step that the British government of many colours refused to take. And that's even after the British Parliament, more than a decade ago, voted in favour of recognition of the State of Palestine. So it is important now that this does translate into changes on the ground. And there are concrete things that I think need to happen. For example, Britain still trades with the illegal settlements. There is not a ban of trade with the settlements. And frankly, as we've seen with the European Union countries beginning to discuss, there should be a full suspension of the trade agreement. Now, these are very concrete things that the British government could do, let alone arms sales, which continue to happen. So there are concrete things that now need to follow from this. But we must admit, especially given the history of the British mandate, of the mess that was left by the British 100 years ago, or at least the mess started 100 years ago and then continued after 47. We have to admit now that Britain has finally come round. It finally has understood that there is a time. And if it didn't recognise the state of Palestine now, the case I had been making in Parliament was there may not be a state left to recognise the way things are going, particularly with the building of the E1 settlement that risks cutting off Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. So I'm glad the government's got here eventually. It shouldn't have taken the devastation that we've seen in Gaza, let alone also what's happening in the West Bank, for us to get here. And, you know, Netanyahu understands that the isolation of Israel is continuing, in part because of his own actions. I hope this ignites momentum, but above all, I hope it ignites just a small bit of hope and a tiny step in the right direction after what, let's face it, has been many, many months of devastation.
Layla, the modern German state and body politic consider themselves to have a special responsibility towards Israel, towards Jews, because of the obvious, the events of World War II and the Holocaust. Should Britain bear some special responsibility, shall we say, towards Palestinians because of its role in 1917, Balfour? And are you one of those politicians who will be advocating for that?
I've always advocated for that. I wear both nationalities. You know, I am Palestinian and I am British. And I find sometimes that's a very uncomfortable place to be because especially until today, when we finally recognize the state of Palestine, if you look over the last few decades in particular at what Britain has not done for Palestine, it seems to have erased Palestine from its own history. So certainly I always make the case for Britain.
In terms, though, Layla, of
understand
specific policies, what should the UK be bearing towards the Palestinians? Because in the case of Germany, for example, there are very specific responsibilities and obligations, right?
Well, I think Britain actually, this is a moment for Britain to properly step up because it is one of the states that could be an honest broker in what would be a peace going forwards. And I would like to see specific resources given to the Foreign Office to be able to help lead the Western part. Let's be honest, it's not going to be just the West that does this. We know that there's the Arab alliance that needs to be pulled around as well. But Britain has a special part to play in this. And I don't know about many of your listeners, but I can only speak from my own family's sake. We want a state of Palestine. I want to be able to bring my children there. We want to be able to call a land of our own where we don't live in fear and we live in dignity, just as the Israelis do, where we feel safe and we feel safeguarded for the future. It's nothing more than so many other people in the world have. Frankly, if what Britain does now is make good on that promise in a way that is just and moral for the Palestinian people, that is a step in the right direction and one that I hope they very much start to take today.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing your perspective, Layla Moran, member of the UK Parliament.
Thank you.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.